Crossing the River Trent in Nottinghamshire, Tony and I and our team of archaeologists were off to investigate the Third Siege of Newark. It began in 1645 and was one of the most significant of the entire English Civil War.
Black cat crossing our path. That's suspicious.
We arrived at Devon Park on the outskirts of Newark. This was where the parliamentarian commander and part of his 16,000-strong army camped as they laid siege to the town. Nowadays, the conflict is between local football teams rather than Roundheads and Cavaliers. One of our squad, Ian, had already sustained an injury, but he'd refused to be substituted. This is where we plan to camp and base our archaeological campaign. The rest of the team, clearly royalist sympathisers, headed off to a B&B in the centre of Newark.
I was never that fond of them.
Look at this. Look what we've got to put up with.
I wouldn't keep a dog in here.
During the English Civil War, Newark was known as the key to the north. This was down to its great strategic importance. The River Trent and two vital communication routes, the Great North Road and the Fosse Way, all met here. Since the start of the war in 1642, the town had been a resolute supporter of King Charles I and the royalist cause, but Parliament was determined to take it. After two failed sieges, they were back in 1645 for a third go. This time, they meant business.
But I'm glad I wasn't here during the siege. 6 months of absolute hell.
Pestilent horror by the end.
Plague. Eating horses and dogs.
Yeah.
God knows what else. The
The
horses.
smell of pus must have been unbelievable.
Not for me. I like the story of that cannon. Was it Sweet Lips?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
12 foot long.
Was it 32-pound balls it fired? That's about 16 bags of sugar. Imagine that coming at you.
Yeah.
But it's named after a prostitute from Hull.
Because she goes bang, bang, bang.
Yeah.
Some camp follower she was.
Hope I dream of Sweet Lips tonight.
You can keep that to yourself.
When a siege comes to town, there are no innocents. Even Newark's church became involved. It was used by the royalists as a lookout and damaged by parliamentarian bombardment. We went up its tower to get a bird's eye view of what the two sides were fighting over.
When you think about the English Civil War, you think about the battles, you think about the glamour of the Cavaliers and the Roundheads on horseback clashing with one another at the big set pieces like Edge Hill and Naseby and Marston Moor. That's what everyone pictures in their heads. But in reality, the real work of winning and losing the English Civil War was achieved through sieges. It was about besieging towns and cities and steadily battling for control of the countryside.
And during the entire period of the English Civil War, there were well over 200 sieges around the country. And 3 of those sieges took place here, which is a real reflection of the importance of this town. But it's the third and longest of those sieges, which is probably the most famous. It lasted all of 6 months and must have been absolutely horrific for the people that had to suffer under it. And the scene that we see down there below us today must have been very different then. Newark was very well defended, but before the parliamentarian army could even reach the town, they first had to deal with the 5 satellite garrisons that ringed it. In November 1645, they began their long campaign to capture Newark by attacking the royalists at Shelford. This was where we were headed to begin our archaeological investigation. Today at Shelford, there's a large house and farm, but what we were interested in was the site's bloodier history. We knew that during the Civil War, there'd been a heavily defended manor house and the remains of a medieval priory somewhere on this site. In the field where we planned to work, there were definite lumps and bumps. 2 likely-looking blobs on our geophysical survey also indicated something under the ground. It was time to bring in the troops and find out what.
Wow. Get some nice bits and pieces coming up.
Hey! That is good.
Is it by magic?
By magic, exactly.
Got a wall.
Wow.
Just started hitting that.
Oh. What we've got here is a large, very substantial wall coming across the trench, and we think, from the material we've found in it, the pottery that we've found thus far, it is medieval and it's part of the priory itself. But what we're trying to establish is really how this earlier part of the site's history melds in and plays a possible part during the Civil War.
Something about this place inspired 180, maybe 200 men to fight against impossible, overwhelming odds. Their intelligence would have told them the nature of the parliamentarian force that was coming against them. They had no hope of holding out indefinitely, but they still dug in here. So we need to try and establish just how defended the place was. How high were the banks? How thick? How big? Just what was the defence here?
I wanted to find out about the Civil War defences we were looking for, so I'd arranged to meet Christopher Duffy, an expert on siege warfare in Newark's medieval castle.
When the English Civil War kicked off, what was the condition of fortification in a town like Newark?
A pretty bad condition, because we really hadn't had a decent warning on for, so it's about 157 years. What we did have were sort of big medieval castles or town walls, which were fine in their time, but not really up to coping with how war developed for the last 150 or 160 odd years. And the basic problem was artillery. Mortars which could fire huge, great explosive shells, and they come crashing through a space like this, through the arches, and explode in the middle of you. Or you have cannon. They'd fire solid iron cannon shot coming in almost flat at great velocity. And between them, they'd fix your standard castle in a matter of days.
And so did they have to start building new fortifications pretty quickly?
Oh, yes.
From scratch?
And in a hurry, a big hurry, and cheaply and quickly.
And so what kind of solutions did they naturally come to?
Well, there was a solution right at hand across the North Sea in Holland, because the Dutch and the Spanish had been at it hammer and tongs since certainly the early 1570s. And they'd evolved really a new kind of fortification, great thick low-lying ramparts which could do two things. They could absorb cannon shot, but they also enabled you to mount your own artillery in good solid positions.
And what are they making it from?
Well, basically from this stuff here, from earth. And it was relatively cheaply to do. Basically you dug a dirty great ditch and piled the earth on the inward side in various clever shapes. You might have diamond shapes, so you could actually bring a crossfire to bear against anybody coming in against you. So they weren't going to be hit just from the front, but from both sides as well.
So you can pin them down?
Pin them down, yes.
What side would you be on?
Geometrically, the defenders got the advantage, because the attackers got to have a superiority of force of about 3 to 1 to have a level chance of winning. But I'd much rather be on the attacker's side.
Back at Shelford, the excavation of the medieval building we suspected was standing at the time of the battle had moved on apace.
Thanks to a lot of labour, we've got two lovely walls running this way through the trench. So what we've got is a long, possibly rectangular building running this way. You can see quite easily that on this side of the wall, which is the outside, it's really quite nicely well made, this wall. And it actually at the bottom goes in at a chamfer. It's angled, it's not vertical. And that's quite a normal feature on some medieval buildings, where the lower course is actually angled into the ground, and then it would go vertical from the next course up. So what we've got is the lower course of the wall crossing to the inside of the building, behind Rat, who's busy planning the building. So all of these stones will actually be put on his drawing, so we know exactly where everything is. And here you can see the other wall, which isn't quite at this part anyway as well made as the one we've got over there, but you can still see a distinct wall running this way up to here. Now this really is quite exciting because what we've got is a large circular carved stone, and that's actually probably the base of a pillar or a column which came up when the wall was standing, something like that. And what we've got is quite an ornate entrance, probably with a column either side of it, so there may well be another column somewhere over here. If I step in like that, I'm now in the doorway, stepping in behind Helen, who sat in the doorway.
Sorry.
At the other end, we've actually started to get some quite amazing finds. What we've got is actually painted plaster. As you can see, we've got creamy plaster with a red or a pink paint on it. And that was probably just a pattern on the wall, so they've gone to some trouble to make the inside of this building quite pretty. But we've got more of the same, and even more intriguing really, over in the trench that Ian and Paul are working in. What we've got here is a large bank that runs right in front of me, right down that side of the field, and that struck our eyes immediately we first visited the site. It was suspicious, and we thought, right, that's it, that looks like part of the Civil War defences. And we found quite deep down that we've got really quite amazing archaeology in this trench. And as you can see, we've also got in the bottom of this trench Dr. Banks.
Yeah.
And Mr. Duffy. It's like the bear pit. How was your arm holding up? You all right?
Yeah, it's not bad.
Good. It's been busy anyway. Wow. And since when did you start dressing as an extra from MASH?
It's a new look, don't it?
But as you can see, Ian is sat on quite an amazing piece of stonework. And again, we've got that chamfered effect with the angled stone, which Ian's just troweling there. So we've got a huge length of really quite heavy stonework running through the trench like that. So we've got a really substantial building here, probably medieval, part of the original priory, and quite excitingly, we think that it's actually the church, because the priory would be centred on the church and the activities in the church. And this is actually medieval painted glass. You've got very dark glass with a red pigment on it, but if you turn it over, you can actually see where the glass has been nibbled to fit it in. Quite an ornate. There would be a piece of lead that the glass fits in to make up quite a highly ornate stained glass window. And of course, one of the places we'd expect a stained glass window is a church. Not necessarily exclusively on a priory, but it's another piece of evidence that points to the church. Trench, we've got amazing decoration. We've got individually decorated tiles. These are medieval floor tiles, and these must represent some form of heyday. Paul, did you say that there were heraldic designs or something on these?
Yeah. Kind of a shield
Shield
there.
with a lion rampant?
Yeah, which looks like a lion sitting on top of it.
Is that a head of a lion or something there? And that one just
This
underneath?
one? Yeah. Looks a bit like it.
They are phenomenal things. Not only have we got that medieval stuff, but above it we've got a very different layer, and it's crammed full of rubble, of building rubble. It's got bits of brick, it's got soil, bits of earth. It's a real mix, and that's what the rampart, the Civil War defence, was actually constructed from. Now at the moment it looks quite flat and depressed. It's just a spread of material. That's because after the battle, what they actually did was demolish the rampart itself. So like the medieval buildings before them, the defences themselves were also demolished after the war.
The royalist soldiers dug in at Shelford were given 2 chances to surrender. Twice they refused. But one man was determined to sweep them out of his way.
The parliamentarian commander, General Sydenham, points as one of the English Civil War's genuine hard men, and not only is he tough by nature, he's also learned the craft of soldiery the hard way. He's born in 1607, son of a fairly well-to-do Surrey family, but while he's still just a youngster, the family fortune's going a bit of a tailspin, which necessitates young points being parcelled out as an apprentice to various tradespeople, and it's a time in his life that he would later describe as being little better than that of a dog. So understandably, he wants to get himself out of these circumstances as quickly as possible. We know from his own writings, by the time he's 18, he's on continental Europe and he's looking for a better life, and he finds a better life as a soldier. He's a very, very good soldier, and we know this because he rises swiftly up through the ranks. At the Battle of Lutzen in 1632, he has no less than 3 horses shot out from under him, but he's undeterred. So it's bad news for the GDs, but it's good news for points because he's knighted on the battlefield for his bravery. We know he's back in England by 1644, 1645, and a soldier of his calibre is not going to go unnoticed, and it's Parliament that he comes to the attention of, and they appoint him as Commander-in-Chief of the armies of the 7 northern counties. By 1645, things are going Parliament's way. There's a decisive battle at Naseby in June where the Royalist forces are comprehensively routed. Elsewhere, Royalist garrisons are collapsing. Carlisle goes down, Scarborough goes down.
And at Shelford, the Royalist commander declared, "I keep this garrison for the king, and in defence of it I will live and die." But brave words were no defence against a ruthless commander like Points. After heavy fighting, the garrison's earthen ramparts were breached. Points seized the manor house, and 140 of the garrison's Royalist soldiers were slaughtered. When I returned, Tony was straining at the leash. They'd discovered the skeleton of a dog.
But interestingly, if you look at the context, it's actually well within the body of the rampart.
So it's not recent?
It's not recent. It looks like a burial related to this feature.
Dating to the time of the Civil War rampart, this was a very old mutt indeed.
Our archaeological evaluation at Shelford was almost finished. We'd had a fascinating time here. We'd discovered 2 medieval buildings. One was standing at the time of the battle, and the other, we believed to be a church, was buried beneath a defensive rampart. All that was left now of that rampart was a flattened layer of rubble. But, from the volume of this material, we could calculate that the rampart would have been about 5 metres wide and 4 metres high, a very impressive structure. No wonder the Royalists remained confident to the end.
Then eventually, of course, they get overwhelmed by superior numbers and they're hauled out and they're dealt with in uncompromising fashion.
The ferocity of the fighting there is really epitomised by Stanhope, the commander of the garrison here. He was dragged out of the manor, taken into the farmyard and stripped naked and thrown onto the dung heap.
So back in Newark, word must have got round, if our defences fail, that's what we've got to look forward to, but on a town-sized scale.
I'd be packing my bags if I lived in Newark right now.
Taxi for Oliver and Pollard.
If Newark was apprehensive at the approach of the Parliamentarian army, they were also resolute. They'd already held out and defeated 2 previous sieges, and they intended to do so again. Tomorrow, with our team of loyal troops, we were moving our archaeological campaign into Newark itself.
I remember once, when I was a kid, and I was in the greenhouse, and we were supposed to be pricking out, taking plants from one box to the other. I was with Kenton, my brother, who's, 2 years younger than me, and he was messing me about for some reason. So I had the garden fork, as you would, levelled at his chest while he's pinned to the workbench. Like
Ideal
this.
weapon in a greenhouse situation, I would have thought.
Well, the problem is, because I was in a greenhouse, my old man outside saw the situation unfold.
Lack of cover.
I was in like a SWAT team.
Yeah.
I was disarmed, smacked severely around the earhole and dragged outside. But now I wouldn't dream of crossing my brother because he's grown up into such a fantastic guy. Plus he runs a pub.
Well,
But
yeah, but that's the worst of it in a civil war, isn't it? When families get split down the middle.
I suppose, yeah,
With factions.
it's the Civil War at the basic level, isn't it? It must have been pretty awkward on the battlefield
Yeah.
if you happen to meet face to face.
Yeah. Be careful you don't have your father's eye out with that.
Just knock him roughly to the ground.
Yeah.
Take the sword under the armpit.
Yeah, if you see your dad coming at you, just fall
Yeah.
awkwardly.
And just wait.
When I was about 6, I drove a golf ball through the front window of our house, narrowly missing my sister's head, and was briefly put under siege in my bedroom with the forces of my mother.
You didn't have to retreat out the bedroom window or something.
I negotiated an amicable capitulation,
That was very honourable.
as I recall.
Did she let you leave the bedroom with your weapons
I was
intact?
allowed to leave with all my dinky toys intact.
Fantastic.
Let's try not to fall out.
Indeed. Cheers.
Chin chin.
One of the ironies of English Civil War is that despite its name, the Scots, Welsh and Irish all played a very active part in it. and the people of Newark had reason to rue the involvement of the Scots. As points and the 9,000-strong army of English parliamentarians closed in on the town from the south, their Scottish allies approached with 7,000 soldiers from the north. But Newark was ready for them. The town had a new defensive rampart surrounding it, and 2 freestanding forts called the King and Queen sconces covering the approaches.
We were going to be looking for the parliamentarian field headquarters on these football pitches. But first, we were off next door, just behind the goalposts, to investigate the royalist Queen's sconce.
Right, quickest way up.
Jeez.
It's massive.
Some height. You wouldn't stand a chance if I had a musket.
I'd be carrying all my gear, my ladders and stuff for getting up the palisade up here.
I don't think you'd be bothering, would you?
Not unless I was under extreme duress.
It's incredible. Whew. Look at the angle there.
The best way to appreciate the sheer scale of the Queen's sconce, one of the most impressive Civil War siege works left in the country, is from the air. In 1646, with the parliamentarian troops pressing in on Newark, the Queen's sconce was armed to the teeth to stand against them. It acted as a self-contained fort with its own arsenal, accommodation and food stores, and was constructed from gravelly earth, probably strengthened with timber. It was protected by a palisade, a row of sharpened wooden stakes set in the rampart, and pitfalls around the outside. Standing on the football pitches, head-to-head with the Queen's sconce, was Points's huge field headquarters. The sconce's defences separated them. It was these we were now searching for.
This is going to attract attention. People of Newark will come out in defence of their football pitches.
What we're actually looking for are things called pitfalls. It's a very simple defence. It's basically digging a series of pits around the fort itself. And you may have put sharpened stakes in the bottom, but basically these would break up an enemy attack. So if you sent cavalry or infantry against the fort, even before they got to the ditch, they would have been falling into these holes that have been scattered about, I suppose a bit like a checkerboard pattern. So we're just seeing if there's any evidence for these things just in front of the ditch.
The man who organised the town and its defences was the military governor, John Bellassise.
Newark was a tough nut to crack. It always had been, and by the autumn of 1645, it had a tough nut for governor as well. John Bellassise was a classic royalist commander. He was from good, noble Catholic stock, and he was a local man. He was from the area, so he knew the ground well. He'd been in the thick of the English Civil War from the very beginning. The first battle, Edge Hill, he was there. He also fought at Newbury and he fought at Naseby. He was toughened, he was battle-hardened, and he knew the nature of the beast he was facing. When he was made governor of Newark, he understood very clearly that the storm clouds were gathering around the place. The parliamentarians were coming in and they were coming to get his town. So he sets about making sure that everything possible is done to prepare the place. It's autumn, the harvest has just been taken in, so he makes sure that that food is laid down to make sure the town is well provisioned for the months to come. So he gets the townspeople out and he gets his soldiers out creating state-of-the-art defences. So he's done everything he can to prepare the place. The siege is happening now. It's actually on their doorsteps, but they don't just sit there and wait to see what's going to happen. They continue to sally forth under Bellassise. So this is the atmosphere in the town. You know, they're not just sitting waiting on the inevitable, they're ready to take the fight to the enemy. Points, as you can probably imagine, is thoroughly sick and tired of this whole place, and he's sick of the way in which it won't just lie down and die. So he starts to try and cut off every last supply of oxygen that he can think of. He's turning the screws, it's tightening and tightening the whole time. So far, the line he's got around the town is a bit of a colander. There's holes in it. People can come and people can go. So he throws around what's called a line of circumvallation to the east. Now, this is a real physical barrier of banks and ditches through which people cannot pass. He has a Scottish army of 7,000 men on the island to the west, cutting off all lines of approach from that direction. So now we have the stage set to draw it to a conclusion, and he throws in a second line of banks and ditches from which his men can actually move towards the walls of the town itself.
So you've got this unstoppable force of parliamentarians, but they're coming up against the immovable object of Newark. Poynts has 16,000 men at his command, ready, hovering over the place, ready to move. So just how cavalier can Bellasyse be feeling now? Storm clouds had definitely gathered over Tony in the Pitfalls Trench.
We'd have expected them to be quite big, I think. 6 foot deep, maybe, sort of thing that would trap a man. But there's nothing like that here. There has been in the past, there's been an orchard here and farming here, which may have taken them away.
It was Devon Part 1, archaeologists 0, but the game wasn't over yet. On these pitches stood General Poyntz's field headquarters. This was a massive camp, fortified with earthen ramparts and brimming with parliamentarian soldiers. It was from here that Poynts masterminded the final weeks of the attack on Newark. Now it's completely disappeared, but we were going to try and find it.
It must have been hellish for the people of Newark because, I mean, it's like the worst case scenario. The enemy is right there, just waiting for the opportunity to get in through the defences and do whatever it is they're going to do. So day after day they can see these guys out here, and at night they can smell the cooking and they can see the fires and hear the chatter, and it's just a matter of time as far as they're concerned before something snaps and these guys are in amongst them.
No, I wouldn't like them camped in my back garden.
No, not in my backyard.
After digging and troweling tons of earth in the 2 trenches, Paul turned up our first clue.
I suspect that might come from a cooking vessel of some sort. Or they're just using, the rough pottery, basically, to carry about and cart about with them and cook their meals and things round about the campfires in the evening and get a good feed before they start bombarding the Queen's sconce again.
Andy Robertshaw from the National Army Museum was paying us a visit. We don't know what the neighbours thought when he turned up with a cannon, but we were impressed.
What's this?
This is our Falcon, 2.5 pounder. How bad is it?
Right. Beauty.
It's a standard small field gun of the period. Can you pull that off? Music. Right. Ready? Speed of the army is governed by how quickly you can move your artillery.
Yeah.
That's the slowest element.
Right. And this is a small gun.
We're at the centre circle, are we?
Yeah. Right over the spot.
That's good.
Forward a bit.
Excellent.
Right.
That's fine. So, where are we?
Well, hidden behind that hedge, believe it or not, is the Queen's sconce.
Yes.
Which is right behind the goalmouth there.
So the earthworks here, is this?
It's just rising up just below that hedge line.
Yeah.
So we're very, very close to it. And our tent, for your information,
Yeah.
is across the other side of this playing field and beyond the other field.
Fine.
Just down by the river.
Okay. I've got some clothes for you.
So mine's in here, is it?
It is, it's not much. Just a coat.
I've got a school blazer.
Well, hang on, on
Oh,
it goes.
great.
Okay, that's the gorget.
I assume
Nice and
this
thick.
just goes over my shoulder.
Yeah, what that is, it's a bandolier. Bandolier of boxes. Each of these bottles contains enough gunpowder for 1 shot.
Oh.
And down here you've got a flask with fine gunpowder in.
Great, so I'm a walking bomb. That's magic.
Well,
Guys.
every time you pick
Keep that metal away from me. Get away from me, you horrible armoured guy.
Put your right arm out, it goes through. You're dressed either as an officer or a cavalry trooper. A very rich one, to be perfectly honest, because you've got the whole lot on. You'd be wearing boots with it, big pair of spurs, horse, main weapon, sword, pair of pistols. And this is pistol proof. Right. It won't stop a musket ball. But against a sword, that will work. You're dressed as basically a private soldier, private sentinel. But the other thing is, which side are you on? Big problem. Everybody looks the same. They speak the same language. They wear the same clothes. So what you've then got a situation is that on the battlefield, you have to actually identify your soldiers by wearing either a sash, if you can get everyone to wear the same sort of colours, or you literally do what they did at Marston Moor and Naseby, is they pick what they call a field sign. Bunch of peas in their helmets. Worn at Naseby,
That'd be
yeah.
me. That'd be my regiment. I'd have a tin of baked beans on my head.
Yeah, it's not. It's the whole army. And at Marston Moor, it was either a white handkerchief or a bit of paper in your hat. And it means that all the allies, that's the Scots and the parliamentarians, were all wearing the same identifying means.
Right, shall we have a look at how this thing
Fine.
works?
Well, what we've got here then is our weapon, cannon, range about a mile, point blank, hitting the ground about 140 yards away, 140 metres, I suppose. But let's think about how you load it. First thing to think about is safety. What you want to make sure is that when you fired the weapon, you've got no burning embers in it. And then, who's going to do this?
Oh, I'll do it. He's got armour on, he might make a spark.
Yeah.
You've actually got two
Get
mops.
away from me. Just stand back, please. Well, I like the blue touch paper.
Two mops. Wet one goes in a bucket of water, pull it out, spin off any surplus water, and then it goes on the barrel.
In
All
there,
yours.
just
Off
in
you
there.
go. Ah, don't do that. This side. Imagine this. At some point in the loading process, you're going to have a charge of powder down there. You walk in front, it goes off. You're all over the field. So you always work from this side all the time. Wet mop down at the barrel, right to the bottom.
So that'll put out any burning embers inside.
Yep.
Oh, that's nice.
Isn't
That's
it?
a nice tone.
Put it on the floor again. You want to keep them all neat. You don't want to fall over the damn things. You want some speed here. Then a dry mop, you're drying it out. The next Q-tip, and it goes.
Why are you drying it?
Because if you don't dry it, the powder's going to get wet, and you build up the amount of fouling in there.
Right,
So
wait for it.
And then you pick up the ladle, which is just there,
This thing.
that third one. And what you've got there is made of copper, not iron, because you don't want to spark, of course.
Yeah, stay away.
Yeah. Charge of powder from a barrel. You simply scoop it up, and that's one measured charge. Is what you're going to need. That goes down the barrel. Once it's at the bottom in the chamber, you turn it over, and that dumps the powder.
Okay.
All right, down the barrel. You're standing in front of it. Now that would be deadly.
You're going to get
If it goes off
killed.
now, it goes through you. All right.
Oh, great.
All right? But we haven't finished yet.
You've got a great job.
History again.
So what we've then got is wadding. Grass, straw, anything, just to help give a seal to the end of the barrel. Excellent. Compresses it, pull it out. You can stand there. Someone else will put in your round shot, and that's it. 2.5 pounds of iron.
It's quite small, isn't it?
Yeah.
Cannonball.
Well, it is. It's a small piece, but of course very effective. That will go through 6 men. One of the parliamentarian observers of Newbury says it was distressing to have men's brains and bowels blown into our faces.
I can imagine.
Absolutely. It would spoil your day, wouldn't it?
It's not exactly what you want before
Absolutely.
lunch, is it?
What we're then going to do is step back, and we're then going to think about both traversing and elevation.
Traversing?
Traverse left to right, elevation up and down. Assuming we're trying to get something on top of the sconce, what we might want to do is actually make the weapon higher. So what you've then got is this thing, which is the wedge or quoin, and that wedge allows us to adjust the elevation from right down there, which is the maximum, so quite low if we had that point blank. What you're then going to do is, can you pass me the flask, which is in that black bag? You're right, thank you. You then step back. Last job is to prime, put powder on there, and then who's going to do this?
Oh, I've loaded it. I'll fire it,
Go on then.
mate.
It's your
You-
problem.
You take this,
Step away from the gun.
all right?
So,
That would be it.
bang.
Fizz, 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 bang. But what happens then, this is why you've got the long stick, the long linstock, is to make sure you're outside the wheel, because the whole weapon will then jump back.
So you don't want to be stood behind it at any point, or in front of it. In fact, nobody go near the cannon. It's dangerous.
Let's just leave them out.
Health and safety. You won't get much sleep, would you? Oh God, I've got a battle tomorrow. I've got to deal with that cannon all day. Right, well now I'm a fully trained gunner. I'll take you on a duel.
This isn't going to go well for me.
There's your ball. There's my ball.
Yeah.
I'll see you at the other end.
I'll see you in hell.
You better start running, mate. I'm loading. Mind you, give me half an hour.
I think he's in place, he's taking cover, I'll warn you. Now that is cheating. You seen this?
I'll just take out the goalpost.
Dry mop.
Dry one.
That'll do. Then what?
To the bucket.
Yes. No, stand in front of the barrel. That's it. Ball, ball.
Now I've got to move the bugger.
Yeah.
There he is. Right, I'm there.
Not bad.
He's moving. That's not right. That's not fair.
Get him when he moves back, don't worry. Stand clear. Hang on, he's still moving.
Kiss your backside goodbye. Bob's your uncle.
I think he's gone. He's history.
That was a bang, Neil. Trained stuntman or what?
We were now off to rejoin the rest of the squad and continue the search for Points' field headquarters. final whistle, all that was left to do was finish off and record our excavation. In the trench between the football pitches, we discovered the traces of a large bank that we believed was the outer rampart of Poyntz's headquarters.
But what happened very soon after the Civil War was that all trace of the camp within inside the ditch and the bank was actually taken away by ploughing. This land was very soon after turned into farm fields. And what we have is a very rich plough soil, and within that we've even got pieces of pottery which date from the Civil War. This is probably stuff that was used by soldiers in the camp. And what we're able to tell is that this bank probably stood for quite a long time as a very visible linear boundary. We've got a field drain there that may have been dug maybe 100 years after the Civil War. We've got the line of a fence there with little stake holes running that way. And all of these features on the edge of this field run parallel and respect this bank, all of which tells us that for a long time this was a very visible, upstanding feature. So even though the camp is gone, this bank was here for a long time, and all of the activity that was happening here was respecting it.
After about 4 months of siege, things were looking increasingly bleak for the royalists. Poyntz's field headquarters were firmly established very close to the town, and he could now begin to squeeze Newark until the pips squeaked.
Nice cup of tea. Fix you right up.
That's foul, Neil. That milk's off.
It's all right to me.
That's definitely turned.
As the siege wore on, the effects began to tell on the royalists. Everything in Newark was in short supply. Matters were made even more desperate because Parliament's allies, the Scots, had seized the town's grazing land. And in the last part of our work here, we were off to try and find the Scottish camp.
Who's a child? Looking pretty wild.
It was the Scottish army here at Newark that was to play a crucial part in the outcome of the entire English Civil War.
Where's his home? Where's he gonna roam?
The whole of the western side of Newark was occupied by the Scottish Army, about 7,000 strong. Now, in this wide area, we know that they constructed a variety of defended positions, but the biggest thing they did here was to construct a huge camp. Now, these are Scottish soldiers fighting in England on the parliamentarian side, so they're a long way from home and they're feeling a bit homesick, no doubt. And for that reason, they called the place Edinburgh.
And we know from the maps of Newark that were drawn at the time of the Civil War that the camp was surrounded by a large bank and a ditch, and that had bastions in it with guns. Now, although it was a massive site, all we're left with today are great big open fields. It's like Texas out here. So what we've done is we've opened excavation trenches in likely places, but we're also going to use metal detector survey here on quite a large scale. And we're hoping that using that technique, we'll be able to find debris dropped by these soldiers, and at the end of the day, hopefully tell us whether or not we're anywhere near the camp.
As we began the metal detector survey, we could let our minds wander and start to imagine this great expanse teeming with Scottish soldiers intent on tightening the noose around Newark's neck. At the height of the siege, the town was being bombarded from every side. 16,000 soldiers manned 58 emplacements and 14 miles of ramparts, all brimming with cannon and mortars. I knew where I'd rather be.
Nice. Great.
Yeah, that's a goodie.
As the hunt for Edinburgh continued, I broke ranks and headed into Newark to visit a present-day resident, David Markham of Nottingham University. I began by asking him why the townsfolk didn't leave Newark when they had the chance.
I think they would have stayed because they had property here, because they had interests here, and whatever the dangers, there would be a willingness on the part of people to try to hang on to what was theirs, however desperately. That was one motive which held people to the town. And I think the other was loyalty, because remember, in the early stages of the war, Newark had actually raised a regiment to serve the king.
What would be the simplest economic disruption for the people?
Towns in the 17th century depended on coming and going. People coming into the town to market and so forth, and the constant ebb and flow of trade. But with the siege, everything stopped. The town was bottled up, so there was absolutely no movement of money at all. You needed money really for two reasons. I mean, remember, the economy has died, the markets aren't being held, there is widespread unemployment, but you need money for two things. One is actually to pay the soldiers, because if soldiers don't get paid, they mutiny. And the other thing is that you've got to keep the economy moving. So the way in which they got over this in Newark, the way in which they got over the lack of coin of the realm coming into the town, was by creating their own coinage, so-called siege money. These are these curious little lozenge-shaped pieces of silver which were being produced from the end of 1645 through to the end of the siege in 1646.
Do these coins have any real value, or are we just talking about a chip in a casino that you could
No,
redeem?
you're talking something of real value. I mean, this is a siege coin. It's got its worth in pennies on there, 12. On t'other side, it's got Siege of Newark, 1645. This is a pretty well-worn specimen. I think someone must have kept this as a souvenir in their pocket after the war.
And what's it made of?
It's made of silver. A lot of the silver to make those actually came from Leicester.
Right.
Because one of the big successes of the royalists was the capture and the sack of Leicester. And as part of this, they took away all of the corporation plate and a lot of other silver and loot. And it seemed that this actually came back to Newark and was actually struck up into these siege pieces.
What's the psychological impact on the population?
One of the big problems in the Civil War, particularly towns under siege, was typhus. And certainly, by one interpretation of event, Newark was in the grip of a major plague by the summer of 1646. And when you get the effects of bombardment and the plague kicking in, then I think the effect of that must have been deeply traumatic. And I think that after 6 months of this, the town must really have been at the end of its tether.
In the end, though, it was events elsewhere in the country that would ultimately seal Newark's fate. King Charles's garrisons up and down the country were falling. Even his headquarters at Oxford were now under siege. The game was up, and he knew it. Determined not to surrender to the English parliamentarians, he travelled here to Newark to give himself up to the Scots. Once he was their prisoner, the Scots demanded that Charles order Newark to surrender. So at the end, it wasn't the plague, the starvation, or the defences that let Newark down. It was their king.
Just over 350 years ago, in the very fields where we were now metal detecting, the Scottish army camped and helped to bring Newark slowly to its knees.
Oh, there's a button. It's a bronze button.
Oh, wow. Our metal detector survey had begun to build up a picture of life inside the Scottish camp. Before Andy left, we wanted his opinion on some of the artefacts that had caught our attention, so we rendezvoused back at the tent.
This is a little lovely.
Nice, nice. Copper alloy, the top of a very, very big priming flask. When you've loaded a cannon, you put the charge in and everything else, you've got to then prime it so that when you put on the match, it'll go off. And you need a very, very big flask with a lot of powder in it for a very big gun. And this is the lid to that long spout which goes on the container, hung on a gunner's hip. It's just from an absolutely enormous flask. It means a very big gun. You don't need something like this for a little gun like a Robinette or a Saker or any of the smaller guns.
Big siege gun.
Big siege gun. Mortar, perhaps, something like that. Yeah?
Wow.
Kind of catering size.
Well, definitely, yes. That's what you're talking about. Big amounts of powder.
It's really nice because you can tell it's handmade. It's all upside.
That's great. Well, it would be, as there aren't going to be many of them being made. They're not mass producing them.
This next one, we don't know what it is, but we like it.
It's petite.
Okay.
It's copper alloy again.
Bit of a contrast. Ooh. Well, on a ramrod for like a pistol or a carbine, you've got on one end the flat bit that you actually put the charge down with. The other bit is then threaded to take a little tool, so you can then clean out the interior of the barrel or getting at any debris, and that would go on the end of not a musket, but perhaps a carbine or a pistol, something like that.
It's quite fine and small.
Quite fine. It's too small otherwise. Yeah, so that would make sense. I suppose that could be lost quite easily.
This isn't exactly the prettiest thing we've ever found, but it's telltale anyway.
We're finding a lot of it. Wherever we put the metal detectors in, we're coming up with bits of lead. That's nice because it's wrapped into a parcel.
all the Civil War sieges that we know a lot about, they're collecting lead, they're using it, and they're taking it out of windows, roofs, gutters, anything, and then bringing it together to cast shot.
So basically you've got a lot of houses without windows and roofs while all of this is going
Absolutely, but it does mean you've got ammunition.
We've got a whole bit of production line going here actually, because we've got the next stage in the process. I've not seen one quite like that before.
Well, you don't often see them because that's quite a small calibre, as it's carbine or a pistol ball. But when they cast it, there's this thing called sprue that you really trim off pretty quickly and then clean up before you fire it, because if that was put into a weapon and fired, if that bit of sprue got stuck, then there's no way for the force to get out, and the barrel explodes. This one has never been finished off.
Just dropped, maybe?
Just dropped.
Lost.
Well, if you're working on grass, you'll lose a few.
So that's good evidence, though, that they were making musket balls.
Yeah.
This is slightly larger, actually, but it doesn't have the sprue. And
well, that is a musket ball because it's bigger. It's about right calibre for a musket of the period. An ounce, just over an ounce. I mean, there should be theoretically 12 musket balls cast from a pound of lead. But this one's actually been fired, and it's obviously struck something like that. You can see where it's hit. So it's a fired musket ball.
this is Neil's favourite.
Needle
quite
case.
nice.
Oh no! Handmade, hand stamped, because each one is done in turn. But that's a thimble, little copper thimble. Top of it's gone when it got squished. But that's the sort of thing that you're going to have, either if a soldier might have, but more likely a woman. So camp follower, repairing, you'd need it.
Nice.
But it's nice as getting that range of military things then linked to domestic.
Yeah.
It all makes it a bit more personal, doesn't it?
The metal detector survey had shown a density of finds from the Civil War period that suggested we were in or very near Edinburgh, the Scottish camp. Which was more than could be said for what we'd found in our trenches.
We've been wandering over these massive fields for days now, following the digger as it's been digging holes. We've had several attempted mutinies from the team as they've been scraping, shoveling, troweling the bottom of these muddy holes. And what have they got at the end of it?
Wall to wall, bugger all, zip, nada, niente, zero. Not a lot.
Absolutely nothing.
Bellasy's final act as commander of Newark was to negotiate an honourable settlement for the town's capitulation. Under the terms of the surrender, they were allowed to march out of the town with their horses, arms and possessions intact, heads held high. Our work at Newark finished, we met the others for a goodbye drink at the very inn where Charles I surrendered. Once in the hands of the Scots, he was taken north. His grim progress towards the executioner's block in January 1649 had begun.